Thank you so much for that introduction. This very morning, one of you in the audience said that it was so nice to be only among nice guys and gals. But there is one bad apple here, actually, and that's me. Because I'm going to try to shift your focus somewhat. And to help me do that, please imagine that this very morning when you woke up, you had become electrohypersensitive. And it's up to you, after my talk, to decide whether you want to be treated by people in white coats as patients, or if you want the environment to be treated since you have a functional impairment, or maybe a combination of the two. If one acknowledged the functional impairment part, then the organizers of this conference, which they haven't done, would have urged you all to turn off all your electronic equipment, because we do have a number of electrohypersensitive people in the audience. So, I will run through a lot of this quickly because Lennart already covered most of it, and since the hour is late, we could run along. In Sweden, electrohypersensitivity is an officially fully recognized functional impairment. I want to stress it's not a disease, it's not governed by a diagnosis, and this is done by the Swedish government since the year 2000. And as Lennart also pointed out, the handicap organization gets a governmental subsidy of approximately 200,000 euros per year for its work. But its symptoms are already classified as an occupationally related symptom-based diagnosis in this ICD-10 code system, which since then has been updated to, I think it's 11 or 12 even, and that happened also the same year, 2000. Sweden has a handicap organization, the Swedish Association for the Electrohypersensitive. They are included in the Swedish Disability Federation, Swedish municipalities, because they are the ones responsible for disabilities. They follow what initially was called the United Nations 22 Standard Rules, but since 2007 upgraded into the United Nations Convention on Human Rights for Persons with Functional Impairments, which, by the way, is the highest legal level we have on this planet. And it's very simple. It's extremely simple because it can be summarized, all these hundreds and hundreds of pages, into one sentence. People with functional impairments such as electrohypersensitivity or multiple chemical oversensitivity are entitled to have an equal life in a society based on equality. That's it. And to achieve this, the most important principle is the one about complete accessibility, meaning that this room would have had to be made accessible for all persons with MCS or EHS. In Sweden, we view functional impairments from the point of the environment. And that means that no human being is in itself impaired. There are instead shortcomings in the environment that cause the impairment. And it is the environment that should be treated. And the definition by the United Nations on functional impairment says that every human being, many times, particularly children and teenagers, will become functionally impaired during their life. Every time I go to French-speaking countries, such as part of Belgium, France, and so on, I am completely functionally impaired because I cannot speak or understand French. On the other hand, Frenchmen, when they get to Sweden, they become functionally impaired because they don't speak Swedish. And that means to, for instance, force a person to quit one's employment or to move from one's home, like to one of these white zones indefinitely, is a serious legal violation. That is not okay. And the same goes for children. You are not allowed to discriminate them from their educational rights. Never, ever. And so, in essence, persons with a functional impairment electrosensitivity shall just enjoy their human rights. Nothing more, nothing less. It's so simple, you know. And it's up to society, and that is you, to decide if we should treat you or the environment. In Sweden, you see what we do. Then I will quickly run through a couple of slides, results of science, and I will mostly devote time to my own publications. They are very few, because in Sweden there has been and still is extremely difficult to get any form of funding to investigate the functional impairment electrohypersensitivity. Very early we could show, and this is from the 1980s, in human skin from people with electrohypersensitivity, that their skin contains a huge number, each such a white dot is a cell, and cells immunoreactive to a transferase, an enzyme, shortened PNMT. At that time, we didn't know what it means. We still don't. We have not been able to further investigate this. We also could see that so-called protein S100, immunoreactive dendritic cells, and here in the upper part, the epidermis, they are badly damaged by something in people with electrohypersensitivity. And of course, the culprit could be chemicals and or electromagnetic fields. We still don't know that. Very early, we could also see that if we exposed people with electrohypersensitivity, and this is before and this is after, in this case, if I remember correctly, I think it was 1 hour exposure, they will lose the dendritic cells, which is the outermost portion of their immune system. And actually, they don't lose them. They just travel inwards to immune-competent organs, such as lymph nodes and the spleen, etc. And they do classically react to ionizing radiation, but in this case, they were just put in front of an ordinary household television set. So they seem to also, exactly the same way, react to non-ionizing radiation. Also, as pointed out, we were very early in showing and publishing results documented that people with electrohypersensitivity have a dramatically increased number of mast cells in their skin, and these mast cells we visualized using immunohistochemistry towards histamine, and I know Professor Belpom will elaborate on that later on, but also to chymase, tryptase, etc. And we also did various forms of stereological measurements regarding their size, number, etc. And we can also see that there was a pattern change and also relocation, which again, this is a textbook image of the reaction of the skin to ionizing radiation from like plutonium, uranium, X-ray, or strong ultraviolet light. But they are not. They are just electrohypersensitive. So very early, this is from 1992 actually, we decided that the working hypothesis should be that these are not postmenopausal women, these are just radiation-damaged men and women and children and elderly. And the interesting thing is that one single cell, and I'm sure Professor Belpom will talk more about that, namely the mast cell, and one single molecule, namely histamine, can explain the whole list of symptoms from various organs in people with electrohypersensitivity. We also did studies, if you look on C and D here, where we exposed normal healthy volunteers to the radiation of household television sets and household computer screens. And then we saw an increase of the number of mast cells without the concomitant reaction of the persons. They didn't report any form of subjective symptoms. Well, some of them said it was boring to sit with the back towards computer screens and television sets. That was it. But no other subjective sensations, and still the cells in their skin reacted as if we would have X-rayed them or put them towards radioactivity, but it was only television sets and computer screens. Other scientists like Peter French and Charles Harvey have investigated mast cells in cell culture, and to make a long story short, they have shown that this is a non-thermal response and the cells react as if there would be an allergic reaction. And very early in Sweden, we coined the term electrical allergy for the persons with electrohypersensitivity. It's not allowed to use it any longer, but maybe that term actually was very correct. They do react to alterations in the environment and with a very simple allergic reaction. The possibility is there. Another colleague in Japan, Hajime Kimata, he has investigated atopic eczemas. And as you know, in atopic eczemas of the skin, the common denominator cell-wise is the mast cell again. And these eczemas get worse if you allow them to talk in mobile phones. So if you're an eczema in Japan, you should not buy and own a mobile phone for sure. Kimata could also visualize this by following blood-borne markers such as substance P and vasoactive intestinal polypeptide, which rose in the blood parallel to worsening the eczema. We have also investigated various forms of protective measures. Prevention, again, not to allow too many in the population to become electrohypersensitive, as well as allowing people with electrohypersensitivity to work again. And together with colleagues in Finland, we could see that shielded computer screens and computers could be used by people with electrohypersensitivity. People that before that couldn't work any longer suddenly could work at least for a few hours, some of them even a whole workday without any problems if professionally shielded equipment were installed. And we heard before about this in one of the presentations as well. And that also led me, I'm sorry that you don't see the image here, but I have a PhD student, Eva Ruth Lindberg, and she presented a thesis for the Royal Institute of Technology with me as the supervisor, which she tried to use building planning and building technique to help people with the functional impairment electrohypersensitivity to shield their environment, and she also produced, as an architect, a kind of model house that could be built for a family or expanded to be built like such a big house we are in right now, and in a completely accessible way. It's actually pretty simple to do that. And again, maybe tomorrow's housings also for normal, healthy people will be in this category because no one wants to become electrohypersensitive. I tell you, it's not nice to be electrohypersensitive. That's a real struggle for many persons. And I coined very early, 1983, I guess no one of you were hardly born then, you know, and I said that this is the largest full-scale experiment ever. What happens when we, 24 hours around the clock, wherever we are, allow ourselves and our children to be used as guinea pigs, whole body irradiated for the rest of our lives? And I have repeated the question, and no one seems to be willing to answer. No, I'm kidding. There are a lot of answers to this. The insurance industry, the manufacturers of telecom products, the operators, the radiation protection boards, and even the World Health Organization have sort of waved goodbye and said, we do not take responsibility for this. We are not to be liable in the future for this. So certain levels of society has clearly answered this question. They are sure that this is a big health hazard, and they are sure some will have to pay for it. And at a meeting in London 2004, the representatives of the operators and the insurance industry said, it's not a matter of if there is a health hazard, it's just a matter of who will pay, and we won't. They were very outspoken, very clear about that. Well, that's a business model, of course. And we have seen that
Can you wrap,
people
Olle?
ending their commitments one after the other. And we have continued, together with people in this room, to write resolutions, and we will try to write another one this time as well, again with the aim to protect the population, and especially tomorrow's citizens. And as pointed out by Cindy before, we also need new biologically based public exposure standards instead of the technical ones we have today. But maybe the answer, the simple and correct answer is, The only prevention is no more full-scale experimentation. And I have only once in my life seen anyone propose a hygienic safety value, and that happens to be myself, namely the natural background. If we go back to that, then we are sure that all these effects we have heard about will not be seen in this generation or future generations. And maybe when Expressen, one of the tabloids in Sweden, 1994 said that these gadgets are the perfect Christmas gift for your family, maybe that was pretty stupid. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olle.